It's time to find out
What Shane said
with Shane Manila.
And we're back. Time to discuss some wide receivers. So let me kick this off with a question for the crowd. Let me ask you, how many elite wide receivers would you say that there are on a yearly basis? And this is strictly based on production. And we'll say that 17 points is the cutoff for elite production. How many wide receivers would you say on a yearly basis hit that threshold? 17 points per game. Write the number down, and then you can share it in the, what the answer is in the comments. No cheating, and if you cheat, I'll have absolutely no way of knowing. So, yeah, you can cheat if you want to. What brings this to mind in the Patreon, in the Discord, Dynasty Trades in 5 Discord. We had some conversation around wide receivers, elite wide receivers. And one of the things that we were talking about, there's been some consternation, some concern. Well, concern is probably too strong of a word, but some consternation about the wide receiver market and about a oversaturation of the wide receiver market. And that got me to thinking, does it even matter? Really? There will be obviously new wide receivers every year joining the market, but is it really going to affect us from a fantasy perspective? Because from my perspective, I think I've talked about this for a long time. I truly only care about the elite producers, right? And that's why I asked you about how many elite producers do you think there are on a yearly basis? Without doing any work prior to this video, I assume the number would be small. Just based off what I know playing fantasy football, I assumed it's a small number. So what I wanted to do, that I wanted to quantify that. So I went to Fantasy Pros using full point PPR and funsies. I went back a decade. I figured a decade's probably a pretty good data source. So going back to the 2014 season, that's a full decade using Fantasy Pros data. Thanks, guys. Full PPR, points per game scoring. And the one caveat is I took out anyone that had fewer than 30 receptions because that's just too many. But mostly everyone in here had at least 40 receptions. And quite frankly, most of the receivers had much, much more than that. So what I wanted to do is just break this down into numbers. I wanted to see how many receivers hit certain thresholds, right? For example, in 2014, there were 35 wide receivers to score at least 12 points, 12 fantasy points per game. There were 20 wide receivers to hit 14 plus fantasy points per game. There were 11 wide receivers to hit 17 fantasy points per game, and 4 wide receivers to hit 20 points per game. Now I'm not going to go through all those. I'm going to go from a high level. So from the highest level, 20 points per game, right? Because I think we all know that would be the highest threshold. That's like a super threshold. That's like super elite. We'll call that super elite. It's a very technical term. So in 6 out of the last 10 seasons, that's a decade, there have been 3 or fewer wide receivers to score 20 plus fantasy points per game. 3 or fewer wide receivers per game. 3 or fewer wide receivers per season scored 2 points per game. 3 per season. That's 6 out of 10 seasons. That's 60% if you're keeping keeping score at home. Those seasons were 2016, 17, 19, 2020, 21, 2022. Reason I listed those years off, I just wanted you to know it wasn't just the beginning of that data set, right? That's literally started at the beginning, in the middle of it, towards the end, literally. 2023 is not in there, but right up until the run up into 2023. So again, 6 out of those 10 seasons, only 3 wide receivers hit 20 plus fantasy points per game. 60% of the time. 60% of the time, only 3 wide receivers scored 20 points or more. That's not a lot, right? I think most people would agree with me. So 20 points per game is a very, very, very hard threshold to hit. The one season that had the most wide receivers to hit that mark was all the way back in 2015 when 6 wide receivers did it. And that led to absolutely nothing because the following season, just 1 wide receiver did it. So that led to nothing. It was a runway to absolutely nothing. In 2017 and 2023, there were 5 wide receivers that hit 20 plus points per game. But again, in 2015, when 6 wide receivers did it, it's not like it led to some kind of revolution. And then in the following season, the wide receivers exploded. So it's not something that happens a lot, is what I wanted to say. It's not super frequent. I can't think of the correct way to say that in English. So reiterating that point, 60% of the time over the last, what's the word I want to say, decade, 3 or few wide receivers hit 20 points per game. So the next threshold, still elite, not super elite. So we'll call it like impressively elite. I don't know. I got to think of better terms because these terms kind of suck. So if you can think of better terms, give me them and then I can steal them and take credit for them and not give you credit. So 17 points per game. There's been some fluctuation, but not much. It's been pretty constant. I will say in 2014, just going back to 2014, there were 11 wide receivers that hit 17 points per game. You go to 2023, there were 8. In between there's been some fluctuations. It got down to as low as 4 in 2017 and as high as 13 in 2018. But I will say over the last 3 seasons, actually over about the last 4 seasons, but the last 3 seasons, we'll say last 4 seasons has been pretty constant. All the way back in 2020, there was 10. There was 9 in 2021, 9 in 2022, 8 in 2023. And again, obviously, this is 17 points plus. So that would include any wide receivers that scored 20 points as well. So fairly constant. Again, 10 wide receivers hit 17 plus fantasy points in 2020, 9 in 2021, and 9 in 2022, 8 in 2023. Again, not a lot of wide receivers. I think what I want to reiterate again here is this less elite, but still pretty impressive tier, if we want to use that as the terminology, is really pretty consistent. It doesn't fluctuate a lot and it stays fairly low. You want to say the range, I'll get into the range later, but it's a fairly low amount of wide receivers. We get into the 14%, or excuse me, the 14 plus point range. There's been, again, some fluctuation there. There was a high water mark back in 2020 of 29 over the last 10 years. And that fell to 20 in 2022, and 22 in 2023, which wasn't not a giant drop, but there's been, again, a lot of fluctuation, or not a lot of fluctuation, I should say. There's some fluctuation. You go back to 2014, there was 20 wide receivers that hit the mark. In 2023, there's, again, 22 wide receivers that scored at least 14 fantasy points or more. Again, not a huge mark, but it is getting bigger. And then you get all the way down to 12 points, which I care a little bit less about. 35 wide receivers hit that mark in 2014. And in 2023, 38. Again, the numbers fluctuate. At one point in 2019, that number got all the way up to 41 wide receivers had at least 12 points per game. It got as low as 27 in 2017. But again, those numbers generally between 35 and 40. I will say, again, 12 points is less important to me because it is more replaceable. It is less important because it is less impact. 12 points from a veteran is obviously different than 12 points from a, what do you call that person? A rookie. But again, that's a topic for another day. So just some quick takeaways I wanted to hit from this. So just hit some quick points. So there's been some concern that there's like an apocalypse coming, right? To wipe out the wide receivers. I think there's a concern that is kind of overblown. We're worried about a landscape that doesn't actually exist, right? There's not a large number of high-end producing wide receivers. The truth is there's a limited number of high-end producing wide receivers. There's about 8 to 12 every year. And then there's everybody else. There is already a finite number of elite wide receivers. I don't know that it can get more finite, if finiter. I don't know if finiter is a word, but I'm going to use it. And I'd venture to guess over the last decade, we probably, if we go back and look at the rookie classes over that time, I bet you we probably had thoughts that some of those wide receiver classes were going to oversaturate the market. Now, you could go through this, and I'm probably 100% sure that 3 wide receiver sets and things like that have probably increased, and they're probably being played at a higher rate. So you could also look at that, and that probably will have an impact. But again, over the last decade, I think we'd probably could look back and have reasons to believe that the wide receiver market was getting oversaturated. But the scoring, the fantasy scoring, at least from the high end level, has remained consistent from the number of players that are scoring at a high rate. I don't know that the Dynasty market, including myself, truly recognizes how finite the elite tier is. We often throw around, I think, the term elite. I think we include players like Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson in that tier, or at least in that discussion, when, quite frankly, they don't belong in there. Not yet. Now, could they? Yes. But again, that's a different discussion. They're not there yet. One player that has gotten steamed up, who really drove this discussion, is Drake London. Drake London is wide receiver 12 on KTC. Drake London has never finished higher than scoring 10.9 fantasy points per game. And he is the wide receiver 12 on KTC. AJ Brown, for comparison purposes, is the wide receiver 8 on KTC. He has 3 seasons where he scored at least 17 fantasy points. Again, Drake London has scored his career high 10.9 fantasy points last year, his second year. In AJ Brown's second season, he scored 17.7 fantasy points per game. So this gets to part of my topic today, or at least one of the thoughts is tearing down. We talk about tearing down. We talk about, I think, too often that just adding a first to a Drake London is equal to AJ Brown. And I think we might be wrong. Because AJ Brown, again, is an elite scorer, and Drake London has not shown to be. He could be. I don't think he will be, for what it's worth. I guess that's a player take. That's a huge leap also from 10.9 fantasy points to get to that 17-point range. I'm not a mathematician. It's about 6.1 points per game, which is pretty significant. But the larger point being, I think we just assume that ascension is going to take place. As a matter of fact, I know that we're assuming that ascension is going to take place, and not you specifically watching this video, but you as a dynasty market in general assume that based on the fact of his KTC prices. Now, again, not everyone swears by KTC. It's a general market valuation tool. But again, I just think that's interesting. That oftentimes, and I've been guilty of it, and these are just names. It's not just Drake London. It's often wide receivers like, I don't know, say Michael Pittman and the first. And we'll say, give up Michael Pittman. Or if you have CD Lamb, maybe give up CD Lamb for Michael Pittman in the first. And I think we're maybe too quick to think that's a good deal under the process deal. And, I'm Mr. Process Deal guy. And maybe we need to look a little harder at the process deal and put a little more, I don't want to say thought into the process, but we do need to look a little harder at it is it a really great idea, right? When we're tearing down, maybe we don't tear down, right? Maybe that's the lesson. At least maybe we need to be a little more careful into what we're tearing down to. If we're tearing down from the 20 to 17 point range and getting what looks to be an early first back, good stuff. That's the Fonz right there. I don't know how many of y'all get that reference. Not many of y'all, probably. Lord, I'm old. But we probably shouldn't be tearing down from the 20-point range wide receiver, of which there's literally, what did I say? Like 5 of them, 3 of them. It's a very rare, it's a unicorn. You know what I mean? Like, we don't want to be trading a unicorn for a zebra with a pole strapped to his head. They're not the same thing. Not at all. I don't really understand that reference, but I'll go back. So we should not be tearing down from a 20-point wide receiver to like a 14-point wide receiver unless what we're getting back is the second piece of that is absolutely a giant significant piece, is the point I was trying to make. Excuse me. So real quick, going back to last year, there were 8 wide receivers that hit that 17 points per game. There was Tyreek Hill, Keenan Allen, and Nico Collins. I named them first specifically, or intentionally, I should say. Those are the 3. And quite frankly, the only 3 that I would probably, I don't want to say go out of my way, but the 3 most likely I would be looking to trade. Tyreek Hill, because of his alleged retirement that's looming. And that said, I'm still not giving you any discount whatsoever on Tyreek Hill under any circumstances. I don't care if I'm rebuilding, reloading, probably going to be in last place. I'm cutting you no corners. You're paying full price for Tyreek Hill from me. And if not, I will wait it out and trade him in season at or as close to full price as possible. Keenan Allen, because he's old, very, very old. And the target competition in Chicago with DJ Moore and Rome Odunze. And it's going to pay me a little bit. Nico Collins, and you can kick me for this one. Competition a little bit. Diggs, Tank Dell. And I think I'm going to regret that one because I do think that Diggs is probably going to flame out. But if any of the 3, at least of any of the 8 of the 17-point players that hit last year that I would trade, I would think about trading, at least that I'd be more apt to trade, it'd be those 3. Then there's, CD Lamb, Amon-Ra, Justin Jefferson, AJ Brown, Puka Nacua. Again, going through the data, again, looking at how rare it is for players, wide receivers, to hit 17 points per game. I'm going to need to be bowled over for you to get these wide receivers off my roster. You're going to need to pay up. So I just as an example, I looked on the DLF trade finder just for an example of a trade I would take and a trade I wouldn't take. And these are both super flex trades. Someone traded CD Lamb, the 308, and J.K. Dobbins. I could care less about the 308 and J.K. Dobbins. Whatever. They gave that up. CD Lamb, 308, J.K. Dobbins for Jackson Smith and Jigba and a 25 first. No, not a chance in hell would I do that deal. Nope. That's the exact example I was just talking about, tearing down way too far for just getting a first back, and tearing down for that donkey with a pole strapped to its head when you got the unicorn. No, But I would do it for a deal like this. This dude gave up CeeDee Lamb or lady, whichever. Gave up CeeDee Lamb and got Kyler Murray and Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers, whatever. But it's Kyler Murray. It's a super flex. I would do that. All right. That's it. I want to know your thoughts. Hopefully, again, give me your answers. What were they? Were you close to 8? Were you close to 9? So again, the answer, 17 points per game, per season. Generally, it's 8 to 12. The high water mark was actually 13. There were 13 wide receivers back in 2018 that scored 17 plus fantasy points per game. The low water mark coming in 2017, there were just 4. Rough year for wide receivers. I don't know why. I didn't investigate. I'll go look up those 2017 numbers and try to figure that out. So this was more of a discussion piece. Honestly, I just want to know your thoughts on this. Really, I just thought this was interesting. And it was born of the conversations that we had in our Discord. I thought it was interesting. Hopefully you thought it was interesting. That's it. That's all I got. Appreciate you taking the time to listen to me. Have a great one, y'all.